was in traditional societies, once children got to basically adolescent age, the process of integrating them into the adult world began in earnest. And usually it would begin with a type of initiation, that you'd have to do something to prove you were ready. And so many of these traditional cultures had this type of a test for, like, amongst boys, it would be a test of their manhood. Once they get to that age of 12 or 13, they have to do something to show that they're ready to make that transition. We've lost that. We've lost that idea that young people are initiated into the system, into the social or tribal system. They're introduced, they're initiated into the knowledge of the adults. They're introduced into the symbolism of their particular culture and so on, and how to survive successfully within the culture. And that begins very early on. And it begins by taking the young people and integrating them into the hierarchy, you see. And we've lost that. We've lost that by this totally artificial horizontal stratification. And then that leads to complications, because once you get that horizontal stratification, the working assumption is that everybody's going to be learning at the same pace. So you have a classroom of 30 people, right, in math or science, particularly math, because that's what I taught for 15 years, right? Children all have different rates of learning, different styles of learning, right? So when you take a class of 30 kids and you have a set curriculum that you have to cover within the seminar, within the quarter, and there's no flexibility, or little to no flexibility within the framework of that state mandated curriculum, well, if somebody doesn't get something, they get left behind. And math, being progressive as it is, if you lose something along the way and you cannot recover that, if you can not make up for that loss, then you're left behind. So modern math courses, because they're disseminated or taught as a one size fits all, you have some children who have an aptitude who get bored because it's going too slow for them, and they're ready for the next one. They get it. They understand how to balance an equation. Now they're ready to get into some, having fun with some cool equations, move on to quadratic equations or whatever the case may be. You've got other group of kids now who are not getting it, who need a little bit of extra effort, right? And then you've got some in the middle for whom the pace may be optimum, but that's limited, see? So when you lose somebody in mathematics, they're pretty much gone. They're lost. And right now in the American education, you probably don't have more than 10 or 15% graduating from high school that really have sufficient mathematical skills. And that may be generous, right?
Wow.
Well, why is that? Because when I was organizing math classes for homeschool kids, I had, like I said, maybe 120 kids over 15 years that I tutored in small groups. And I would be surprised if there was even a couple of them that came out of there deficient in math skills. Some were obviously smarter than others, and that's the normal thing. But the other dynamic I found is that when you have a group of kids in different ages or different aptitudes, it becomes natural for those who have a deeper understanding of the material. And I would encourage us to help their fellow students and essentially turn into tutors themselves. And they loved doing that. I found across the board that was very much, if I gave, Billy, would you help out Joey with his quadratic equations? Okay, yes, sir, Mr. Carlson. And boom, they'd get to work on them, right? It creates even now a whole different dynamic amongst the age groups, because one of the things that I've experience is endemic to this modern stratification type of approach, is that it fosters bullyism, because it's not organic anymore. Kids aren't learning at their natural pace. So you now get somebody who perhaps is not learning for reasons really maybe even no fault of their own, but they don't meet the standards and they get held back. And immediately they're stigmatized. And what that stigma that they are carrying with them now really serves as to demoralize them about education. What modern monopolistic compulsory education does is it gets kids who are naturally and organically eager to learn, and puts them in this rigid, almost factory-like system, and basically stifles their love of learning within a matter of a few years. This is what we have to get away from. We have to bring it back to that learning is a joyful experience. And also, as important as the classroom is, to get out of the classroom into the field, into the real world. And this is what I try to do all the time with my classes, is bring the students out into the real world. Oftentimes, because I'm a builder and would always have projects going, that provided a perfect opportunity to bring the kids out into the field. And we could then use that to segue into all kinds of lessons. So for example, bring them out there in just a raw building site. Nothing has happened there, right? What's the first step? You bring them in and you show how you stake out the corners of the building, right? And drive the stakes in the ground, which is not hard to do if unless you're, into super hard clay or something. But I would even get the kids to, drive that stake into the ground there. Then I would show them how we would use geometry to lay out the outline of the building. And then we would outline the building with string. Okay. So you would see the corners of the building, and then we would run it in string, and I would show them how you could use geometry to make sure that your angles were true right angles. And so we've had a geometry lesson in the classroom, and now we're out in the field doing it. Then we would do any number of lessons. For example, now if we're going to put a building here, I would then teach them about how we have to distribute the weight. And this now gets us into proportions, because if you've got a fixed weight bearing on the ground, right, there's going to be so much pounds per square inch, and there's a ratio. Then if you extend and put a footing under that building wall, you've now you've changed the ratio. So you're now distributing the same amount of weight over a bigger area. And I would show them, here's how you use a penetrometer. What that is a little device that shows you what is the bearing capacity of the soil. We then go back to the classroom and we have some formulas, and we work those formulas, and you now can take the kids through the whole building process, and you can take them right through using, if you want to keep it fairly simple, I would get up to using trigonometry, how we create the angles of the pitches of the roof, how we use trigonometry to lay out a set of stairs that's comfortable for the proportions of human anatomy to negotiate. If we wanted to get a little more complicated, we could get into talking about thermal energy transfer coefficients between different kinds of materials. So here's the problem we're going to solve in class today, right? We've got this wall. It's made of masonry, say, and here's the transfer coefficient of heat through that wall. Now let's figure out, how long it would take for that wall to heat up, absorb the heat from the sun. In other words, what I'm getting at is there's almost an infinite number of ways, with a little bit of creative thought, how you would bring in real world problems to solve and to show this is how we use geometry. This is how we use trigonometry or algebra, right? When kids get that, it's a whole different ball game than looking at something that it seems so abstract that why would you even use this? What is this for? Why do I need to? What's the point of learning about a quadratic equation? So to me, the hands-on approach to education is critical. Also, the other thing being the integration of different age groups in order to create this much different dynamic than being cast into a huge amorphous pool of your peers.
Hello, I'm Robert Dakota of Worldviews Media, and I'm here with Randall Carlson. We've been talking about upcoming weekends here in April for Easter, the 15th to the 17th, and the weekend after, for those who can't make it that weekend, the 22nd to the 24th, will be a presentation of Randall's Grand Vision, which is a presentation to establish a school, a research center, conference center, retreat facility, village and community to bring teachers, parents, students together to explore new paradigms of education. And Randall has been working in this field for more than 4 decades. And some of the topics that he's covered and some of the topics that will be covered on these weekends, like ancient mythology, astronomy, earth science, symbolism, sacred geometry, architecture, geomancy, and other arcane and scientific traditions. There's a lot covered in there. I'm going to let Randall take it over.
Well, I would have to agree with you, Robert. And that was quite a list of things you checked off there. Yeah, we'd try to touch into all of those things and how they would integrate into a system. But yeah, I think anyone who's paying attention has to recognize the dismal situation regarding modern American education, compulsory education. Of course, it's important and mandatory that kids learn, but kids learn at their own rate. Learning is an organic process. And what we have in modern American education system was basically produced originally factory workers. And so it's regimented artificially. It's regimented horizontally according to age, which is unnatural. It's also regimented by means of subject matter. So the various things that one learns in school are segmented from each other, segregated from each other. So, you might go to an art class, but that has nothing to do with your geometry class, right? When I started organizing classes in 1995, now this is coming after decades of organizing classes for grown-ups in some of the subject matter we were just talking about. In the mid-90s, I got drafted to put together some programs for kids that were being homeschooled, most of who had come out of the Waldorf system, because at that point in the Atlanta area, the Waldorf school did not go past 8th grade. So you had your first group of graduates from the Waldorf system in Atlanta that did not want to go to public school, did not want to be part of that system. It's important to note, and I had never even given this much thought, but I realized when I started learning about the Waldorf system and how it worked, realizing that, for example, a child would come in of first grade age, I guess 6 to 7. They would have a teacher that would follow them all the way up through their adolescence. Now, when you have that situation and you have smaller classes, well, obviously now think about the difference, the teacher, how more effectively the teacher can come to know the individual students. Because see, that's the thing that the modern education system tends to do, is to strip the children of their individual identities and try to impose this herd mentality upon them that would, the tribal mentality, the community mentality would come about naturally and organically anyway. But again, the system was designed to, in effect, produce factory workers. And this is why you have this regimentation through the day. When your civics class is over, the bell rings, and then you hurry down to PE, and then you do your PE class for 55 minutes, and then the bell rings. then you go to your art class. Now, it doesn't matter. Let's say that you're in the middle of this creative, convulsion. You're painting, you're doing something in your art class, and then the bell rings. Boom, you got to stop. Now you got to go over and take your English class, right? Or you're in your English class and you're writing a story or an essay, and your creative juices are flowing and you're working and you're in the zone, and then boom, the bell rings. Now you have to go to PE class, whatever the case may be. That's my point. So what you have in this system is this artificial stratification and segregation that goes on. And to me, this really tends to dampen the morale and enthusiasm. I mean, I'm a big proponent of free schooling as much as possible. In other words, you have to have some regimentation, you have to have some structure, obviously, but within that structure, you should have lots of room for improvisation, creativity, and so on. Now, and I'm noticing here my shoulder keeps disappearing. Maybe you can Photoshop my shoulder back in when we get to it.
No problem.
But what I realized and what I started doing early on was I started inviting parents. Parents would, this is what I noticed like the first year. Some parents would, I had rented a classroom in a church. I rented a room in a church and I turned it into a classroom. And I used that room for maybe more than 10 years. But the parents, sometimes the mom, sometimes the dad would bring their children, drop them off to the class. The kid would come in and the parent might be out and waiting in the car, or going off running errands, coming back. So I said, don't wait until, come on in and join the class. And then I noticed that when parents started coming in and sitting right there with their kids, learning and working, here's the problem we're going to solve, and they're working on that together. I found that was extremely effective because it really engaged the parents directly. I mean, when I was coming up, I would, come home and, well, it was expected that I do my homework, but, my father, that's just the way the dynamic was back in that day. My father had been at work all day and he'd come in and he was tired and so I'm on my own with my homework. He's not there looking at my story I'm writing or my history essay that I'm having to write or my math homework. Well, with homeschooling, that changes because now the education of children is not just taken completely out of the hands of the parents and turned over to the state. Traditionally, parents have been the primary teachers of their children in most societies throughout most of the historical ages, obviously with some exceptions. The Stoic tradition, it was believed that the raising of the children should be left to the state. So, I mean, this is rather the Spartan tradition. The raising of children should be left to the state. And that's largely what we've done. We've turned over the education of children. We've taken it away from the parents and put it into the hands of the state. And I think what we've seen is coming out of World War II. Prior to World War II, American education was widely dispersed. It was decentralized, and there was a lot of local control, right? After World War II, the emphasis became on centralizing the whole system and gaining a much greater control. The Department of Education was created so that there could be a centralized authority over all the states, all of the communities. And there began at that point an integration of local school districts. And the idea of that, Robert, was so that the school districts could be unified, because by having them dispersed and having decentralized control, the federal government in Washington didn't have the influence it wanted to have over curriculums, see? So after World War II, what they began to do was to pressure the states into consolidating school districts into these unified districts that were now going to be subject to a controlled curriculum and so on. The way they did that was by holding the stick and the carrot of federal highway funds. You integrate your school systems and bring these half a dozen small dispersed decentralized school systems into one, right? Because now you can manage the unified system much better. The state governments can, and now the federal governments will be telling the state governments what they're supposed to teach. See, and this all really came out of after World War II, and this is when you started these large education warehouses or factories that came along, where instead of a small group of 25 kids ranging in age, you now got these large factories. You've got 1,000 and 2,000, sometimes 3,000 students in there. When you have a system like that, what happens to the individuality of the student? Well, the whole point is not to encourage the individual development of the student, but to integrate that student into as a member of the herd, and a herd which is easy to manage by a centralized authority. And this has become the sort of the dominant goal of modern education, not to produce independent critical thinkers, but to produce subservient students. So by the time you get out to adulthood, you're basically just ready to live your life the way you're told to live it. And used to be, at least when you got to the college level, college was supposed to be challenging. It's supposed to be intellectually challenging. Here's where you have to grapple with a diversity of ideas, looking at different philosophies and opinions and so forth, different interpretations of history. Look what's happened to college now. That has been completely replaced now by this system of political correctness, where there is a certain model, a state-approved model, that basically has stripped away the ability to think critically, to think independently, because now we see that rather than a diversity of opinions, it's limited, and students are now being insulated. Instead of being put out into the real world where they're going to get some knocks and challenges, it's now they're being insulated, and they're being pampered and babied with, safe spaces on the campus where you can go and you can cry because somebody has upset you because they exposed you to an idea that you found that triggered you. I mean, this is not what college is supposed to be. This is not what it's supposed to be encouraging and inculcating in students. This kind of helpless, we've been triggered because we heard something that we found offensive. This is has nothing but the demise of American society as its consequence. So, having gone through all that, what are the alternatives? Well, the alternatives is before us now is incredible, Robert. I mean, the potential we have for coming up with alternatives to this one size fits all, mandatory, compulsory, politically run system are virtually infinite. And so what I want to do is I'm trying to take some of the ideas and the things that I have learned over the years from various subject matter and integrate that into a curriculum. Now, I have done classes and seminars on a lot of different material because that's what I do. In my spare time, I like to study. I like to research. I like to learn. And I've been an obsessive learner my whole and entire adult life. So the things that have interested me, ancient history, symbolism, mythology, the study of the earth, the sky. I've loved astronomy. I've loved geology, loved archaeology, all of these things, the mysteries of our existence and life on this planet. And in some ways, I guess you could say I still have kind of a childlike approach because I'm still totally excited about the things that we know and that we don't know, and constantly wanting to learn more. And what I have found is that there are ways to try to break through the conditioning to which way too many adults have demoted themselves, that has now basically taken away that have no more they've lost that love of learning and excitement about the world and the mysteries of our existence. How do we bring that back? Well, this is what I've been trying to do in my classes, my courses, the tours that I've led, and so on. So out of having been a builder and a teacher for many decades, those are the primary two things that I've done to earn my keep in the world. is to bring that experience, that life experience, and that particular skill set together in the creation of a school slash conference center slash retreat center slash community, right? Because ultimately, again, it's about integrating these components of society that have been artificially segregated. And so there's obviously much more detail within that larger framework, but let's talk for a minute about some of the things that we might actually teach at such a school. So one of the things are, I'll just go through a list of some of the things that I have studied. But before I do that, let's just set out a sort of a general framework of thinking. If we look at traditional societies and the orientation of traditional societies, which have, of course, have all achieved these goals, at different levels of success, some more than others. But the general idea overall is to literally link the heaven and the earth. And because you see, one of the things that's sort of the byproduct of the Industrial Revolution is we've lost that connection. Once as we've become an urbanized society, we've lost that organic connection, with the sky that was such an ever-present part of the existence of our ancestors all over the world, going back literally hundreds of generations. So what we now know within our thinking of, say, 2022 is that there were very pragmatic reasons why an interest, almost bordering on obsession, was so endemic to many ancient cultures all around the world, right? But there was several parallel lines of importance or value to this idea of understanding a relationship between earth and sky. One of which, of course, I think if we, in many of my classes and courses, what I've tried to teach on is the idea of catastrophism, that there is in any system, in a unified or sort of, let's say, a linear system, a gradualistic system, there are natural points of interruption, which you might think of as nodal points. And those nodal points are basically what dominates the progression of the evolution of any system, whether it's a natural, organic, biological system on the earth, or whether it's a social or cultural system, whether it's a business, whatever the project may be, there are natural points of inflection where the direction can change quickly and instantaneously. I look at the big picture and try to inculcate an awareness of the big picture. So what are the factors that cause that allow, say, the rise of civilization and the advancement of civilization? What are the factors then that contribute to the demise or the downfall of that civilization? So that, when you start thinking in that framework, one of the things that it comes back to constantly is education. How are people being educated? Now, if you have a nation of people that are asleep at the wheel because their education system has spent 12 years dumbing them down or more, as composed, let's say, with a nation where the citizens are fully capable of thinking critically, where they're well educated, where they understand authentic history, they know how to, they understand basic science, these kinds of things. How much more effective and how much greater would be the probability of that second society becoming successful, enduring, and long lasting as compared to the first society where people are basically just dumbed down and doing what they're told to do? I don't think there would be any comparison at all. So how do we get to that second version? Well, this is where I think what we need to do is start establishing a system of prototypes, prototypical expressions of this idea of, I think of it as hardware and software, that the hardware is something that we've tended to get away from, which was the physical system. Everybody's living in the digital world now, right? So, and you see kids who are glued to their phone, glued to the television set. They have never, here they are, adolescent, teenager years, they've never seen the Milky Way. They couldn't find Polaris, the North Star, if their life depended on it, right? We're losing something because we become 80% urban, 20% rural, which is the complete opposite of what we were as we come into the 20th century, when we were 80% rural and agrarian and 20% urban, right? So I think that detachment that has occurred, that disruption, if you will, between human consciousness and what's going on in the larger cosmic realm, that has been severed, and it's been severed to our psychological, emotional, and spiritual detriment. So how do we bring that back? Well, we do it the way our ancestors did it traditionally. We begin to create an infrastructure that reflects this relationship between the earth that sustains us and the greater cosmic ecosystem of which it is a part. And we're in a privileged position now because we have the traditional systems that we've learned a whole lot about in the last, say, half century, even within the last decade or two. The way our ancestors did things, right? We also have this corpus of scientific knowledge and insight at our disposal now. And it's in the integration of those that I think we can begin to create prototypes of what could evolve if we're free to pursue those objectives, right? So a curriculum. Here's what some of the things that we would bring to this center. I'm going to pull this up, and I'm going to go. One would be in a school of alternative and experimental architecture, because there's all kinds of new potential modalities for creating places of residence and places of work and so on, using experimental systems, alternative systems, systems that are more environmentally friendly. I'll just throw an example out that has tremendous potential within the architectural realm. Hempcrete, right? Now, this is something that could have evolved, decades ago, but because of the political climate, it was not allowed to. But we're discovering that hempcrete is an extraordinary versatile building material that can be applied very practically and very creatively to a whole variety of architectural solutions, right? That's just one example. Also, a master course in sacred geometry and its application in design, art, crafts, science, music, etc. And here, I know that there's a lot of new information coming out about sacred geometry now and what actually that is. I've seen many many comments, offhand comments, sort of being dismissive of it as if it's nothing more than New Age woo. Let me be very clear on this note. It is as far as from New Age woo as you could possibly get. It's a very practical system. It was employed repeatedly by cultures throughout history around the world, and it's a powerful way of integrating a lot of different components, whether they're terrestrial, using its expression through architecture, through art, through all of these various ways that sacred geometry can be used. But the underlying idea in the employment of sacred geometry was a very effective tool for creating harmony, where you've got disparate elements, bringing them together in a harmonious whole. That's where the power of sacred geometry is. But also linking our own body with the planet, the heavens above, linking our consciousness, going back to the Jungian model of archetypal consciousness. The archetypes of our consciousness reflect the patterns and proportions of sacred geometry. We are walking representations, living, walking, breathing. We humans are living, walking, breathing manifestations of sacred geometry. So sacred geometry has been an important component, and I would like to see it come back. I would like to see it be taught to architects, to designers, to artisans. It's a powerful philosophical tradition. I like to emphasize the practical of things, so I would be looking to use it, to present it and teach it as a tool for using for any kind of a creative enterprise. A sacred geometry master course. Archaeoastronomy, which is something that was practiced by ancient cultures all over the world, which is the very specific and practical integration of earth and sky. And so an agricultural society would have practical day-to-day, season-to-season need for understanding those relationships, because obviously what's going on in the sky is affecting directly here below, in terms of the unfolding of the seasons and so on. But it went way beyond that. It went way beyond that, because really all you need for, basically understanding and predicting the seasons is simply a stick in the ground. It will serve you. So there was no practical need, obviously practical need, for example, to build a ring of giant 20-ton stones in order to mark out a calendar. There was another reason for that. And part of that, again, gets into this integration of earth and sky, because the philosophical idea was the creating of heaven on earth. I mean, this is what many of the sacred traditions were trying to do, was to create heaven on earth. And so the building behind me, Casa Rinconada, is an example of a building that's built according to the movements of the heavens. And it's in the part of the Puebloan culture of the Southwest US. But we can find a similar system at work in virtually every continent. I guess the only continent that we have not found such kinds of evidence is Antarctica. But everywhere else, we find the implementation of the same idea, that the movements of the heavens are somehow captured into the built structure of society. So the archaeoastronomy would be getting into understanding those principles, like the principle of the horizon calendar, for example, which we find all over in dozens and dozens of examples. Then, of course, the study of the earth, geological research, what I would call geocosmic research, which is studying the geological, archaeological, astronomical programs, would be important. Outdoor skills, teaching the basic outdoor skills of that our ancestors used to have, practical skills like that. And I think that's where it's very important now to get young people out of the urban areas, out of the classroom, into nature, because we know now that how vitally important it is for kids to be exposed to nature, for adults, for anybody to be exposed to nature. So that would be a big part of it, outdoor skills. And then, the growing of food. We've through industrial farming, we've become, and there's a place, there's a place for industrial farming, but it's right now the dominant system. And what we're seeing right now, Robert, is that system, we've seen that there are vulnerabilities to that system, right? A shift in climate, which is inevitable regardless of what we do, can have dramatic effects on agriculture. Things that happen in society. For example, what we're seeing going on right now with the disruptions in the supply chains. Okay, we're getting along pretty damn good, actually, but at least here. But I can say for myself, going into some of the major grocery stores, I've never seen this many empty shelves, right? I don't think we're going to come down. It's not going to get to the point where people are having, suffering from famine, God forbid. But here's the thing. What these events are teaching us is that there are vulnerabilities within the system. I'm not saying we should scrap the system. No, that's not what I'm saying. We can utilize it. However, we need backup systems. That's what we need. We need backup systems. So if there is a social disruption due to either a political or an economic or a natural type of disaster, we have backup systems in place so that we can sustain whatever it is that we're engaged in. We can sustain our efforts. We can sustain our microcosmic system that we've created. So that, because you have to have that, because in the event of a natural disaster, you have refugia, you have these places of refuge where life would survive. And I mean, you can see the same, whether it's a forest fire, a devastating forest fire, a volcanic eruption. A few years ago, I went and visited Mount St. Helens to study the recovery of that particular ecosystem from that catastrophic eruption in 1980, in May of 1980. And what you see, the pattern is the same throughout the natural order, the natural world, is that if you have a devastating disruption, a catastrophe, a disaster that basically wipes out the local or regional ecosystem, nature has a strategy for recovering. And it basically works by having places of refuge where life survives. And from that place, life will disperse into the wasteland. And that dispersal comes because there may be pollen, there may be seeds. It usually starts with ferns, see, and from those ferns, you get more ferns. And once those ferns begin to go through their life cycle, they die and they will become integrated into the volcanic ash, say, or into the ash of the charcoal left over from the fires. It'll create a layer. Eventually, it will create a layer of soil that then allows the evolution of higher plants. And it's the same thing with a society. If you have a disruption, the recovery will take place by life and so on, moving out from these centers of dispersal. So that's where we really get into the idea of a retreat. Now, a retreat on one level is, yes, you got to get out of the urban area, go back and reconnect with nature. On the other hand, a retreat may mean a place of refuge in the event of social disruption. I'm not predicting. I'm not predicting that that social collapse is inevitable. I don't believe that. I believe it's possible, not inevitable. Just like I believe, I don't necessarily believe that the probabilities of my house burning down are high, but I still have fire insurance, right? So, getting back to the curriculum, there are other technologies that I think we've seen enough evidence that there were technologies from ancient world that have been forgotten, lost or forgotten. And there's a lot of information out there now, a lot of knowledge that's been recovered in the last few decades, even going back the last century or more, that I think can be recovered and reintegrated, and we can get a vision of other possibilities that were very effective and useful to our ancestors that we could re-employ in a more modern context. And so that gets us what I'd like to think of as the hermetic. That's the hermetic wisdom of the ages. And I think that's important that children learn that. And that does not imply any kind of like religious dogma or doctrination, because there is a common heritage of mankind. And I see many of the religious traditions of the great religions of the world basically evolving out of this common heritage, that there's more that unites these spiritual traditions than divides them. And so the emphasis would be on that kind of approach to knowledge. Also, the healing arts and rejuvenation should be integral to the whole system. There should be ways of healing built into the social structures. And the way that that's going to be accomplished, I think, primarily is through this. In one way, it begins with this reconnection with the natural order, the natural world. So that's kind of what the in a nutshell, I guess. And I also like the idea of work study, that, because there are college, one of the first places I gave extensive lectures at Warren Wilson College in North Carolina. What I liked about that was one of the things I learned was that they had a work study system, because they have an important part of what they teach there is agriculture, right? And so they have a work study program where you pay your tuition basically by working in the gardens, working in the greenhouses, growing food, other things. Now, I would take that same approach. I mean, so I like the idea of an apprenticeship program where younger people can begin to learn these skills in an integrated fashion and be brought up by working under mentors, and teaching practical skills. Practical skills. I mean, look what's happening with kids going to college now, coming out with 4 years, 6-year degrees. And what do they got to show for it? They can't get a job and they're $50,000 or $100,000 in debt. That's insane. And right there, that's symptomatic of one of the major flaws in the decline of this compulsory authoritarian system that we would get away from. Because with a work study, you basically go in there and you're paying your tuition as you go through your efforts, and you're learning simultaneously at the same time. So if we go, as we create this institution, and it's not going to be something we go in, boom, we're going to build a couple of buildings, it's done. Okay, now it's a static finished system. No, it would be ongoing and evolving over decades as I've envisioned it. And as it grows, the infrastructure would be designed and built by the students as it evolves. And the creation of the infrastructure would be part of the curriculum itself. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of Taliesin as well.
Exactly. And I list Frank Lloyd Wright as being one of my major inspirations. Yes, Taliesin is it one of the models that I've drawn from. So,
the life experience is so important, and you don't get it just from do.
No, you don't. No, you don't. Now, I'm not one of these, I know parents that have really strict, no, you cannot watch television. No, you cannot play video games. I think that's okay up to a point. It's the problem is when you have the kid who's 8 or 10 hours a day is doing this, but once you get kids out into the natural world, so, the things that I would see as part of this, this is why one reason the actual physical prototypes that we would create will be in places where nature is easily accessible. And outdoor programs could involve camping. It could involve foraging, learning wild, done to recognize trees, plants, animals. There'd be geological, going out and gathering samples of rocks and minerals at various places. Any number of things, going to museums, going to, if you're in the outdoors, thing that I grew up with was canoeing. And I love canoeing. And I've noticed that when I've gotten kids out in canoes, we can teach actually a form of meditation. Because in canoeing, you're everything, if you're doing it properly, rather than just randomly paddling away, there's a whole technique to it that involves the integration of the wind, the water, your own breath, right? Horseback riding, another thing. That's another thing I did quite a bit as a youth, horseback riding. How many kids have never been on a horse? Now when I was growing up, it was normal around where we lived that most kids had been on horseback at one time or another, all of these things. And of course, what we're doing here is I'm trying to provide a framework, and within that framework, a specific approach to certain subject matters that I can teach. However, in the larger picture, I think, it has to be a flexible system. We can bring in, I want to bring in teachers that have a diversity of skill sets. And I'm already, for example, let's say just producing a podcast, right? Because I think here we are, we're utilizing digital medium to do this. Now, we couldn't have been doing this 30 or 40 years ago, even 20 years ago, we wouldn't have been doing this, right? So I'm that's very much the approach that I would take, would be this integration of new technologies, new science, new things that are at our disposal, but integrating that with traditional modes of action and learning, traditional modes of knowledge. So what we're going to do this weekend is we're going to dive into some of these things. I'm going to show sacred specifics with graphics and imagery, sacred geometry, archaeoastronomy. We're going to look at some geology. We're going to look at some architecture and how an infrastructure might evolve and be created that could serve the purposes. Then we'll introduce some of the preliminary concepts that are now taking shape and talk about the specifics of how we get from a vision here to an actual physical infrastructure where people can participate, and how that would work in terms of its, for example, its legal framework, because there are different approaches there, how that might work. So there'd be this is what we're going to get into. We're going to get into talking about, for example, sacred metrology, which is how you devise a system of measuring that can be incorporated and integrated with sacred geometry and with archaeoastronomy, and how a system of sacred metrology was used in the ancient world. We'll look at that. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of very, very interesting, potent subject matter to this weekend, with the upshot of it being, how can we now apply this knowledge, this way of knowing, to creating prototypes for educating the human species?
Yeah, I'm excited about it, Randall, because, when I was interested in going into teaching and working with young people, it was the school system or some private systems. And I don't know, it just all seemed so limiting. So it was very discouraging. And, I eventually moved away from it just because I felt too limited. And
Sure.
I felt there's more that you could do with young people, especially when, all you got to do is spark their curiosity and they're totally into it, and nature is one of the great motivators. Get them out in nature for people of all ages.
Absolutely. Yes.
It puts a kindness in you and kind of smooths out the rough edges being out in nature, I find.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And same here. This is new research, which is completely supporting what we've just said. This is a typical report on some of the research that's been going on. The escape of a trip into the mountains or a day lying on the beach may feel like an extravagance to city dwellers confined by a traditional work schedule, but exposure to green and blue spaces is far more than just a luxury. For kids growing up without regular exposure to nature seems to have ripple effects that persist into adulthood, according to research published Tuesday in the International Journal of Environmental Health and Public Health. And so they basically discovered how critically important it is for people of all ages to be exposed to nature and the natural world, but especially for kids. So the results of this research, and something that I would definitely be eager to incorporate into thinking about the creation of a school, is this. These findings fold into the biophilia hypothesis, the idea that humans intrinsically seek out connections with nature. An offshoot of this idea is that nature promotes certain developmental changes in the brain, particularly in children, that may not happen when we're removed from it. And this, I think, is one of the most important things, is that when kids are regularly exposed to nature, it's showing that they tend to have higher IQs.
Mm-hmm.
And what's happened now also that's coming out now is studies showing that the children that, particularly in their formative first, second, and third year, with all the masking that's been going on, that those first stages of development, cues from other faces are critically important in learning emotional connections, in learning speech. The list goes on of how critically important it is for small infants to be able to see and connect with other human faces. And literally what's happened now is the studies are showing a demise of up to like 20 IQ points within the last 2 years in small children.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. Yes, it is. And we're going to talk about that in the weekend. We're going to look at that. The things that are damaging children's ability to learn, and things that are enhancing children's ability to learn. But not just children. I mean, I'm talking about across the spectrum of ages. And this is what brings us back to the idea that I would always encourage parents to take the classes with their kids. In fact, I even said, if you bring your kid, you pay your kid's tuition, which I always kept extremely affordable, you can participate for free. You as parent, as mom or dad, can participate for free. And so I almost always had a couple of parents. Sometimes I even had grandparents that came, and I, of course, if we've got room, bring in grandma. She's welcome here. And I loved it. I loved having 3 generations of a family in that classroom together. Now, this is not something that's going to occur in the government-run education system. And in fact, now it's even got to the opposite, where parents are being discouraged from participating in the education of their children. And this is completely ass backwards, Robert.
Yeah, it seems absurd.
It does. And so it's every year it gets more and more important that we come up with alternatives to that decaying and soon to be extinct system. But we have to have these alternatives in place. Otherwise, we're going to have a whole generation of kids that are completely floundering and lost with no concept of reality anymore. And this would not bode well for America.
Yeah. It seems like everything has to start with the education. I like that one saying, if you want to spare punishing the man, educate the child. Yeah.
And in our conversation here, we've been emphasizing with children, but my education, like I said, 120 kids maybe I tutored through these programs that I created. And but I've educated or I've taught these concepts and principles to thousands of adults. So obviously, even we've been talking about the importance to children, but the importance to everybody of all ages. And even in your elderly years, being able to reconnect with some of these fundamental and universal principles that guided and inspired our ancestors throughout the ages and around the world is vitally important to our mental and emotional and spiritual well-being.
It keeps you vital.
Yeah. What's happening now, and particularly with the pandemic, is old people being being separated from their families and from their loved ones, and basically dying off years before because they feel isolated and alone, and their morale disappears. And there's been so much negative that's come over society as a result of our response to the pandemic, that it's going to take a decade or two anyway to restore that, to repair the damage. But we have to repair that damage. Yeah. And we have to ask questions, how do we do that? How do we most effectively do that? And again, I think the ideas we've been talking about here are going to be critical to that, to the repair work and the restoration work that now needs to go forward from here. And it begins with creating alternatives. It begins with rethinking the processes of education, the systems of knowing by which we govern ourselves and our society. And we can see the irresponsibility growing every decade. It's exponentially worse than it used to be. With the now it's finally gotten here hitting Atlanta, where you start now seeing the homeless people within the last 2 years. What would you say? Those that are not, who don't fit into society, that have fallen through the cracks. They're now living on the streets, living in lean-tos and in tents. And you never saw this. I mean, there was always, your traditional hobo and people who were outside the mainstream of society. But now it's become a whole a whole subculture, if you will. Only within the last few years has that happened. And I think that is an outer expression that's symptomatic of this breaking of the natural harmony that has now become endemic to society, to the point where you have these people that are essentially just disoriented. There's no orientation to the real world anymore. There's this disconnection, this breaking of the primordial harmony. And it's the symptoms of this rupture, if you will, are across the strata of society. And what is needed, what is powerfully needed now, again, is some kind of an alternative that we begin to reintegrate not only our individual selves with the society at large, but our individual selves, and this is where it starts, with the greater world, the natural world, that no matter what we do, even if we go to the metaverse, hey, we're still ultimately part of that natural world. We're not going to escape from it.
Yeah.
And so this is what this weekend is going to be all about. This weekend is going to be about, let's start putting these ideas out there. Let's see how we can get this from the stage of idea to the stage of manifestation. And we're working on that. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that are coming together, the people that are coming together that are eager to try to make this thing happen.
Well, it's interesting also, when I talked to Bradley about what dates would be best, with your schedule, it turned out, the 15th to the 17th and the next weekend would be the best times to bring you out here. And it turns out that this year it's Easter, just like we had the first course last year on Easter.
Okay.
And the following weekend is Earth Day weekend. So I thought that was, interesting synchronicity. Easter's about renewal and revival and rejuvenation
and spring.
Yeah.
After the long, cold winter, spring is coming back. Life is,
coming back. It reminds me a little bit too of Renaissance. The idea that after some hard things have happened, this 2 years have been really rough. If you think about some of the things that have happened, I've lost friends, some elderly friends from the exact thing you were describing. Too much isolation. They just don't want to be around for it. What's the point?
Right. What's the point? Right.
So yeah, kind of the potential of a new paradigm in education, or a renewal in an older paradigm, or a combination of possibilities. With creativity, there's all kinds of possibilities. There's unlimited possibilities.
That's right, unlimited possibilities. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a deep dive into the possibilities.
Yeah, I'm excited, and Graham's going to be able to join us here. Graham Hancock will be able to join us here Easter weekend. We'll make an announcement on that coming up, and there are some other speakers that I'm trying to get to come out for Earth Day weekend as well, that we'll announce when we get some confirmation there.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, all right. I'm looking forward to meeting new people, seeing some old friends, and seeing where we can take this thing.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, Randall. I was a part of another organization that had a teacher training program, and we were teaching workshops and meditation. Then it kind of collapsed on itself because it didn't have a firm foundation and infrastructure. And I feel more confident about what we've been talking about, what you've been describing that you have in mind. It feels more grounded and practical. And I see that has, for me, it seems like there's a lot more potential with that than the other operation I was a part of. So I'm real excited about it. Yeah.
Me too.
All right. Well, I think we got some sound bites here, Randall.
Good. Yeah, you can pare it down however you want to a few minutes, or you can have the extended version. Like if somebody wants to listen to the whole conversation, I think it was a good conversation.
Yeah.
Somebody might want to listen to the whole conversation. Yeah, you could put out like a couple of minutes. You could say for the whole conversation, the whole 30-minute conversation, 45-minute conversation, whatever it was, click here.
Okay, Randall.
And we can do more, some shorter stuff too, because I'll go through. I've got a bunch of stuff. We could just pick out 2 or 3 slides. Maybe we just like a few slides on alternative architecture, experimental architecture. One of the things we'll be looking at here is the potential of alternative and experimental architecture this coming weekend. So if this is something that interests you, please join us. Dynamic symmetry. What was dynamic symmetry, and what was, this powerful system of dynamic symmetry? How was it employed? How could we re-employ it? And here's how I have used it to develop a system of prefabricated modular building system. And we're going to talk about that and how we might employ that in the creation of the infrastructure of the school.
That's something I'm really interested in that right off the bat. I want to get doing some building.
Oh, I know.
And the hempcrete, how exciting is that? Because hemp grows in 10 weeks. That, like, compared to trees, take years.
Yeah, I know. That's
why did we get, away from that when it was a 10,000 year culture? That's something I would like to talk about, have a conversation. You and I start a conversation about hemp and its relationship to civilization up until the 1900s, when it was outlawed for the first time ever in history, as far as I know.
Right. Which again is how the detrimental impact on human social evolution of politics and the authoritarian state, which has just basically been like a dead weight around our necks. This is why the founding fathers were so devoted to the idea of limited government. Jefferson said that government is best which governs least, and he was absolutely right. And I mean, the thing is, if you look at the crime today and the disruption and disharmony in society, a lot of it can be traced directly to the forcible implementation of government policy. We don't have free markets. We've not had a free market in education. We've not had a free market in basically anything, really. We did, and of course there were abuses, but those abuses, I think, were temporary phases within an overall upward trajectory. Whereas with government now, it becomes institutionalized. The abuses become institutionalized because you've got, so much potential for abuse within a system like that, an authoritarian system.
Okay, Randall, I think we did well.
Oh, good. I'm glad you thought that. And so I'll be interested in seeing what you come up with. And we can post this around. We'll get, we'll do the shorter versions. You can do a highly abbreviated edited version and put it on wherever, social media, and then provide a link to the long version.
Hey, I like your rap song, that video with you and Graham by Juan Joe Sounds.
Oh, there's 2 of them. Oh, the one with me and Graham. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other one, Cosmic Fire, where you're going, or something. That's hilarious.
It's hilarious, isn't it?
Cosmic Firestorms.
Yeah. That was oh, man. That was over the top, wasn't it? Oh, yeah, that guy is talented. So he's going to actually he's coming into the how to fold, and he's going to do more.
That's good.
Be interested to see what else he comes up with.
That's good. It's always good to laugh at yourself,
Oh, hell yeah. I tell you, I laughed at that. I still laugh at it. When Mike Waslevek, just and then it flashes back to him. Just something about the contrast there.
Expressionless. No.
Yeah. And then finally at the end, you see this little bit of a It was very well done, I have to say. Oh boy.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well,
Well,
I think I'm probably going to head back to bed.
okay.
But yeah, I will do some shorter versions too of some just isolated stuff.
Yeah, that would be great because the Facebook guys want me after we put the money on it to pump it out there. They want me to do like announcement or something at least twice a day. So I got to be on that. And then Bradley was recommending Spencer as well.
Yeah.
So I put a message out to Spencer.
Well, he did a work for 7 years on a documentary called The End of Recess. I guess it's in post-production now, but maybe invite Spencer, and if he comes down, let him actually give a talk about his documentary and what he's learned, and maybe it would even be ready for a showing or something. All right. Well, I'm going to sign off then, and I'm going to be around tomorrow too. So if anything comes up, okay. Well, it's almost 3 a.m. here, so I'm going to slide on out of here, man.
Okay. Nice talking with you, Randall.
Yeah, I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, we'll catch up again soon.
Very soon. Right. All right. Bye.
Sleep well.